Hello, and welcome to the Storied Human. I'm Lynn Thompson. My guest today is Michelle Sherman. She's a clinical psychologist who has dedicated her 30 plus year career to supporting families dealing with a mental illness or history of trauma. She was named the American Psychological Association's Family Psychologist of the Year in 2022. She served as a therapist for over 30 years, providing individual and couples psychotherapy to adults in a VA medical center, urban primary care clinic, community clinic, inpatient psychiatric unit, and private practice. As an educator, she served as a full professor at the University of Oklahoma Health Sciences Center and the University of Minnesota Medical School, teaching and supervising trainees from numerous disciplines. She enjoys public speaking, having given over 250 workshops nationally and internationally. She conducts research and serves as the editor in chief of the journal Couple and Family Psychology Research and Practice. She's published over 75 articles in peer reviewed journals, over 80 book chapters and articles in other sources, and 4 books for the lay public. But we're going to get a little more personal today because she's published a book about her own experiences with having a parent who had mental health struggles, and this is really interesting to my readers. We and my listeners, we really strive to learn more about it, and it's so cool that you wrote books with your mom. And I've read about them; they sound wonderful. I'll probably order them because there's just something about this story. It's just very touching. And to me, it's personal because my grandma suffered with those issues and my mother grew up that way. So I am super excited to talk to you. Welcome, Michelle Sherman.
Oh, Lynn, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here and just touched by the very kind and warm introduction. So thank you.
Well, we're psyched. I'll tell you, I am psyched. It's a privilege to talk to you. I'm so impressed with the work that you do. So why don't you tell me, will you start where you want to start? How you came to write the books or how your career unfolded or
Yeah,
how
so
you're,
I was a
yeah.
math major, Lynn. I got to the point of, shoo, I don't understand this. This isn't making sense to me. I don't feel like I'm really using my gifts and it's not meaningful. And so I switched way back in college to psychology and I haven't looked back. I have really
So good.
enjoyed this field because, kind of as you said in my bio, I get to do a lot of different things. So that's really meaningful. To get more to the focus of my focus on the families, that actually began in the mid 1990s, which is a long time ago. But I was working in a VA hospital with veterans. And honestly, Lynn, I was just struck by all the families sitting in the waiting rooms. The veterans would go in for their 10-minute, medication appointment, whatever. And these families would often sit there and you could just see in their eyes the sadness, the confusion, the loneliness, the shame, the embarrassment. I'm like, these people are all here together. Let's do something about it. And so I wrote my very first tiny grant for $3,000 in the mid 1990s, and I got it and started then creating curriculum for families in which a veteran in that case had a mental illness or PTSD. And it's kind of gone from there. I was really humbled to be in the right place in the right time. And some of those curriculum actually rolled out in the VA system nationally as a best practice for family education. So it was kind of exciting. So that's where that all began in the mid 1990s. And then 20 years ago, I said to my mother, who also lives here in Minnesota, I was in Oklahoma at the time, but I said, "Hey, Mom, do you want to write a book?" And she said, "Anything with you, darling." And so we wrote our first 3 books together, and they came out in the mid 2000s. One was for teens whose parent has mental illness, one for teens whose parent has experienced trauma, and one for teens whose parent had military deployment, because again, I worked in the VA. We're really lucky and fortunate that the National Guard actually picked up the trauma book and purchased 75,000 copies of it and sent boxes to every guard unit across the country.
Oh,
So
that's
it's just
wonderful.
the gap in resources. Lynn, there just have not been resources for these teenagers who we know are at higher risk. If there's a family history of mental illness, they're at higher risk. So that's been super exciting. And so then, right at the beginning of COVID, I said to my mom, "Hey, do you want to write another book?" And she said yes. And so that's why we have written these most recent two. One is for adults. It's
What's the
called,
title of that one?
and that one's called Loving Someone with a Mental
Yes,
Illness or History of Trauma. Skills, hope, and
I
strength
love
for
that.
your journey. So it's not about how do I understand, what is schizophrenia or what is bipolar. I mean, you can Google that these days, right?
Right.
It's rather, what have I learned from the families that I've served about what they need, about their emotions, about what research-based skills they can learn and they can use and help them in communicating, setting limits, solving problems. I mean, it goes on and on. Navigating the healthcare system, which can be so hard. So I
So
really
good.
is very, very interactive, and that it's
Yeah.
not just boring text. It's stories, it's activity, it's reflection questions. We were really humbled to have probably over 100 different people who review it. We had a cultural sensitivity reviewer. We had psychologists, of course, clergy, people who are living the experience, NAMI, and we had tons of people give us feedback to make it better. So that's the one for adults that we were really lucky that Johns Hopkins is a publisher for that. So that was pretty exciting. And then we did a second edition of our book for teens. So that's the I'm Not Alone that you've been referring to.
Yeah, that looks so good. I was reading about that on your website.
Thank
Um,
you.
it's, I'll tell you what struck me when you're talking about this is
Yeah.
that way back in the 90s, you looked at those people with your empathetic self and you
Yeah.
said, somebody's got to help them. And I just love that you were able to think that way because we need people. And that's how it happens, right? Somebody
Exactly.
looks a little differently and says, what about these people? And it's
Right.
so important and it's so beautiful. And your one book sounds like a guidebook, which is so
It is.
cool.
Yeah, it is. It's like, and there's the index of the being. It's like, okay, if you want help with this, go to this chapter. If you want help with this, go to this chapter.
And that's
Exactly.
so important because you need to know what to do. You need to know, what
Right.
can I do? How can I react? And
Exactly.
you don't need descriptions of, this is what this illness is. You
Right.
probably can look
And
that up
that's
as you said.
important. Yeah, you
Yeah.
can Google that stuff.
Yeah.
But we really do intend to try to make it accessible. So it's not like all in the doctor speak. That was part of the joy, Lynn, of writing with my mom, again, who's a teacher and
Yeah,
advocate.
she's a teacher.
Um,
You make a great combo, right?
Oh, we're so lucky. I think we said 99% of the time, oh my gosh, it's great. We really collaborate and work so well together. That's a pretty high number, we think. But, I'll be honest with you, Lynn, writing is a lot of work.
Telling
It's,
me.
all through COVID, every weekend, every day, we've been working hard on it. And it's a lot of work and sometimes kind of isolating and overwhelming. So we lift each other up, we
That's
encourage
so
each
good.
other. She helps me put the psychobabble stuff into a lay person's words.
Yeah.
Um, I'll tell you a funny story. I think this is funny. When we were writing our book for teens whose parent experienced trauma, we were talking about the different symptom categories of PTSD. And one of them is increased arousal, which means, startle response,
Yeah.
hypervigilance, things like this. My sister has reviewed all of our stuff. She's been amazing support. She read it and said, when you talk to teenagers about increased arousal, they're going to think of something different. So hence the power of all of our reviews. So we talk about like intense emotions or something.
Yeah, right. Oh, that's
So
so good. Yeah.
we put it in everyday language. And I'll tell
Yeah.
you, Mom and I also took breaks. We played with my puppy. We'd go, order in
Yeah.
special food or go on walks or things to nourish each other during this process. But I feel so lucky. There's no one else I'd want to write with.
It sounds like the perfect collaboration.
Yeah,
And it
it is.
also sounds like if you wrote any of these books by yourself, they would be really different books.
Huge, Lynn. You
Yeah.
got it. You nailed it.
Yeah.
You
And they would
nailed
be
it.
wonderful books. You're a very knowledgeable person, but your mother kind of added that accessible,
Oh,
she made sure
huge.
that somebody, who's not a psychologist could read
Right.
it and get what they needed out of it, which is so important. So I love that you have that. I was really close
Yeah.
to my mom. I wished I had done something like that with my mom, but I know how
Yeah.
hard it is to write. I mean, that's
Oh,
like, you you got to put your big girl pants on, you know? It's like
You're so right. And for a long period of time. I mean,
you have to
gosh.
have persistence. People
Yes.
don't understand how hard that is. And I talk to a lot of people who write books, and
Yeah.
it's painful. It's never ending. And a
Right.
lot of people who write books have to shift like midstream, like, no, no, this is all wrong. My focus is,
Right.
they'll get a developmental editor involved
Right.
and they'll say, no,
Right.
no, I really have to write this. But it's all the journey. I mean, people don't understand that that's just how, maybe you had to go through that one book,
Right.
like that one
Right.
draft to get to a whole new draft. But I love that you guys persisted and that you supported each other, because
Yeah.
I think in the end you got a better book,
Absolutely.
a
And
really
she knows the
useful book.
science of how to teach too, And so I am not, I mean, I teach, doctors and things like that, but I don't teach kind of the average general reader. And so she's like, okay, if we say it this way, or how about if we have them do
Yeah,
this reflection question, this activity makes all the difference. So
that's
no,
so
the
good.
books are
Yeah,
so much better because of our collaboration. They wouldn't have happened, Lynn. I'm just going to be honest. They would not have happened
yeah.
if we
But
didn't
it's hard to
collaborate.
think of all these things. It's so cool that you had reviewers, you collaborated with
Oh,
your mom, you had your sister. It's just
oh,
so good. And people don't realize sometimes. I've noticed that people who push forward with their books, they often have a book group. They'll often have
yeah.
a readers group. You have to have something
Mhm. Yep. I
outside yourself.
fully
And
agree. I fully
you
agree.
look at what you created, it's so much better for it. And I'm very impressed that it got such, first of all, Johns Hopkins, very prestigious
Oh,
um,
thank you. We are
publishing
really
company.
fortunate.
Yeah.
Thank
And I
you.
love that it's caught on and that people really need this.
Well, but 1 in 4 people has a mental illness at any one time, and half of it at some point in our lives. So not all schizophrenia, of course, like your grandmother, but it's mental illness is prevalent. And then if you look at
Yeah.
everyone knows at least someone, that means like
Right.
pretty much everybody knows someone living with mental illness. So this is not like a really
Yeah.
rare, unusual thing. But we got to raise awareness of the impacts on these families because it's hard sometimes even from my own lived experiences, having family members and friends with mental illness, it's difficult. It's confusing. It's overwhelming. It's really hard. And so my own personal lived experience absolutely, Lynn, sustains, motivates, and makes relevant all of this work.
Oh, it's so important. And if we're aware that it's a possibility or what it looks like, we can be
Right.
more receptive, we can be more helpful. I had a family member and I thought they were acting really strangely. And I
Yeah.
was like, why are they so difficult? Why are they doing, shifting
Yeah.
and moving and turning on us and saying, sort of
Yeah.
I wasn't I wasn't tapped in to what was happening with them. And when I finally figured it out and
Yeah.
they figured it out, it was so much easier because then there was a name. It's so important to name it.
Absolutely. That's
And there
huge.
were ways to handle. And I was so impressed with this person in my family because
Okay.
they got on it, man. They were like resources and, it was just wonderful. It was wonderful to see. There's a way to manage mental illness, but if you don't recognize it, sometimes people can
Absolutely.
just, friends can act strange. I've had it happen before where they can just act
Right.
strange or they don't want to see you or
Absolutely.
whatever. There's anxiety, there's
Absolutely.
depression, and luckily I do see people in the press talking more about it, but I still see a lot of shame though inside
Yeah.
families.
I fully agree. I fully agree. It's like the families talk about, they don't bring casseroles. And that's kind of an antiquated phrase, I think, but the message is the same.
Aw,
Bring flowers, you don't start a food train and things like that because there is a lot of shame. So yeah, you're so right. It's interesting your comment because I think you're so right. Even thinking about the teenagers, when we wrote the first version of I'm Not Alone, literally 20 years ago. Um, I don't think teens knew as much at that time. The social media, all the information has
yeah,
blossomed immensely. So I think teens are more sophisticated. Now,
yeah,
I just will put in my thought, I do worry
yeah.
some about the
A little
information that's
too
put
much.
out there because it's not all accurate. And so
Right.
that makes me somewhat nervous.
That
But
must
yeah,
drive you crazy. Yeah, there's a lot of
yeah,
stuff out there.
a lot
Well,
of bad information and wrong
one
information. Like, here's
one
how
thing
you
that
have.
kind of one thing that shocked me, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. One thing
No, go
that
ahead.
shocked me when I first jumped on more social media was how
Yeah.
trauma seems to be batted around like it's a badge. Like everybody wants to have a trauma that they're responding to. It really devalues people's experiences who've
Mhm.
gone through real trauma.
Yeah, yeah. That's a really interesting reflection. I mean, the research, again, sorry, the research shows most people do experience some sort of challenging or difficult event, but there's a real difference between, we call it the big T and the little t.
Oh,
Okay,
I
so
love
the
that.
big T are
Yes.
the traumas we're talking about, which are defined as a death or near death experience, or certainly any sort of sexual trauma or abuse, or having, a loved one go through it, or being like an EMT or a police officer and seeing that
Yeah.
every day. That's really what we're talking about for big T. Some people say, well, I went through a divorce. Now, divorces can be very, very hard, but they're not the trauma that we're talking
Right.
about.
Right.
So I really want to differentiate those two things
I
because I
love
agree
that.
they're
The big T,
very
little
different.
T. Yeah,
Yeah,
I love that. That's
yeah,
what we need is sort of a framework to think
yeah.
about it, because otherwise it's meaningless if you throw that word around. And I've seen it thrown around like way too
Oh,
much.
absolutely. And I also really believe strongly, and certainly write about this in our books, and this is borne out by research. Although most everybody, myself included, I was in a horrible car accident. I was a passenger in a car accident. I mean, that's very, could have died easily 80 miles an hour into a
Oh,
big concrete
oh my
thing. I mean,
God.
certainly could have died. So again, most people do experience some sort of trauma, but fortunately, most people do not develop long-term difficulties. Most people are resilient in the
Yeah.
natural progression after trauma with community support. Some people draw on friends, family, some faith. Most people recover. Not that you ever forget it. I'm not saying that, of course, but most people it does not become. This is who I am. I
Right.
am
Oh, good.
PTSD.
Good point. Yeah.
And so
Oh my
a lot of
gosh.
people certainly may have depression, anxiety, substance abuse things, but most of those things ebb, and flow over time.
Right.
So the lifetime prevalence of PTSD is maybe 7 or 8%, certainly higher among some groups like veterans and things like that. But most people do not develop PTSD, which is a good thing.
And
And
they throw
furthermore,
that
I'll
around a lot too.
yeah, I'll put in a little plug for this too. There are really, really effective treatments available now
That's
for
good.
PTSD and more emerging all the time. And we have some good science showing that things can really help. Now,
So
of
good.
course, not everyone goes and gets help, but there's a reason to be hopeful. That's why
Yeah.
the name of our company, Lynn, is Seeds of Hope Books, because we're all about
Yes. I
instilling
love
hope.
that.
Yeah.
There's so much to unpack here. It's such good stuff. And the thing that occurs to me is because I've actually been diagnosed with PTSD way back,
Okay.
mild PTSD. I was robbed at gunpoint, and it was very
Oh,
sudden. And
oh,
and I didn't think it was that bad. I mean, I just, like we do when we're young, I just kept moving on, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
it came up when I went to see a therapist and I did some testing. It just kind of came up, and I
Interesting.
learned so much from that because it was buried, right? And
Yeah.
then I got breast cancer a few years ago, and it wasn't
Oh,
bad. I mean, I almost hate to, it's so funny. I almost hate to talk about it because it wasn't radiation. I mean, it was just radiation. It wasn't chemo. It wasn't a long,
okay.
I was so fortunate, but it was still a shock.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I started to, I'm pretty savvy about these things. And I started to
Yeah.
notice, and I'm older. So I stepped back and said, you're having some interesting symptoms here
Yeah.
after the treatment. I
Okay.
also had some complications, and it was really
Mhm.
bad. I had an infection, and I was on the couch for
Oh.
17 days with antibiotics. I think that all
Oh,
made it
yeah.
worse. So I'm pretty strong. I'm pretty resilient, but I noticed I didn't want to leave the house. That's what I
Oh,
noticed. That was the first
interesting.
sign. And then my point is not to bring my story into it, but I do relate to what you're saying.
Oh.
Um, it's treatable. I
Yes.
got help, but also that you have to, it's so important, and you're doing this, and I love this. It's so important that people know this could happen to you after an event. These
Yeah.
symptoms could happen to you. Don't shove them under the rug. Go
Right.
get help. Like, if
Yeah.
more people went earlier, it must be so frustrating for you
Yeah.
because you talk to so many people and they come to you a little later than you wish they did.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's the
So,
whole emphasis, honestly, of our teen book and our focus on teens is prevention. Let's get
yes.
upstream, try to get earlier. And I mean, certainly we know like offspring, kids whose parent have mental illness, are at higher risk for nature and nurture. But there's great research showing that if we can intervene earlier and
Mhm.
actually have some of this wraparound, help them maybe in schools or in work with their social skills or whatever else, we could maybe prevent the development of, or make the illness less intense if we can start early. But like you said, people say, oh, it's a midlife crisis, or they're going to lock me up. There's so many barriers. We could spend a whole hour talking about barriers, Lynn. So many barriers to seeking mental health care that it's hard. Fears, of course, so many things. But if we can help this next generation, and even, all generations, know what the symptoms are to look for,
Yes.
know to talk to someone, because it could be something else. Certainly, these symptoms can be determined, affected by so many different things. Substance
Right.
use, of course, hormones. I mean, physical health problems. So we don't want people diagnosing themselves, but
There's a
go to
full
a
picture.
professional.
Right.
Yeah, go
I
to a
love that.
professional.
See, that's one thing I really feel proud of. I raised my children to think of a therapist as just another doctor. And
Good.
we go when we need to, and they saw
Yep.
me go, and they heard
Right.
about my friends going, and,
Yep.
my son, we took him when he was younger, there was an incident, and we nipped it
Yeah.
in the bud, it was like an anger incident, and he
Yep.
loved going to this woman. She was so wonderful. She was he was like 8 years old, and she was so kind, and so, she was very good with that age. She was a
Yeah.
school recommended therapist, and I almost wanted to cry because she turned it around for him, and she taught him tools, and she was able to tell me he's incredibly sensitive, and she was telling me things that she noticed about him. It just helped us raise him, and
Yeah.
I'm really proud that that was what I presented to the children, and I also talked about that with all my friends because of my background, because of my grandma. I just
Yeah.
believe we got to dispel that shame, and, we got to go for it. We got to say, hey, if you're having a moment, go see a therapist. It's like the way to
Absolutely.
go. People don't
Abs-
people don't always understand what happens in therapy, and they're like afraid, or
Absolutely.
they're
I
like,
think you nailed it. I think you nailed it. That is so right. And I think if we can see a therapist as kind of a primary care provider, you
right,
go when there's an
right,
issue, and you take a break. It's not like you're going to go every week the rest of your life.
right. That's what
That's what
people
we
are
never,
afraid of. Right.
yeah. Or you're seriously, people are afraid you're going to lock me up, or you're going to report me to like Child Protective Services for being a
Oh
bad
my
mom,
God.
or
Oh
all these
yeah.
sorts of things. It's huge. So I love how you really role modeled. This is like you go to the physical therapist when you have a
Yeah.
bum knee or things like that. It's like therapists are there to help us. And what great messages you sent to your kids at a very early age. I love that.
Well, my mother sent that message to me. She was
Yeah.
like, she sort of diagnosed me um
Okay.
when I was in my late 20s, and I was just, I don't, again, I talk about depression on the podcast here and
Yeah.
there because I
Yeah.
want people to understand it doesn't always feel like sadness. Sometimes it just feels like numbness, and you don't
Yeah.
always recognize that in yourself. You just keep going. It's just an
Exactly.
example of how you don't understand what's happening, and somebody else could decode that. Like, I'm amazed at how quickly therapists decode what's happening, and how just that
Yeah.
wonderful feeling of talking to somebody who's just there for you, and who's objective, and has
Absolutely.
all these tools. I'm so grateful to all the therapy I've gone to over the years. I go when I need to, and I teach my children to do that too.
That's awesome. I love that. And I just would add, so much of therapy is the relationship.
Yes.
So if the first person you go to isn't like gifted, like therapist you've had, or the one that your son saw, go to someone else. The good news
Well,
is
I'm
there
so glad you
tend
said
to be
that.
a lot,
I've
but
had
some,
horrible experiences. I went to one who was absolutely horrible, but luckily I was older and I was able to discern that. And I wasn't, this is what makes me sad though. If you're really hurting, it's hard to shop for a therapist. I think it's
totally.
really important to talk about that. Like, no matter how bad you're feeling, don't settle for someone that doesn't feel right.
Absolutely. And I actually usually say, give them one or two tries. Maybe it's just a
Yes.
bad connection, but then it's like, you are not stuck. You have options. Go
It's
find
so
someone who's a
good to
better
say that,
fit.
because I went
Oh,
from the one who was horrible, and I should have, like, if I'd been feeling better, I would have called and reported her.
oh, really? That bad?
Yeah, but I wasn't
Good.
feeling well enough. But
Yeah.
I went from her to this, like, Earth Mother, like, just
Oh,
older
really?
Earth Mother, like
Yeah.
my vibe, like I was like, I love you, you're my people. And she was so kind, and she was so, and what I was
Oh,
talking about was really serious, and I
yeah.
couldn't get past it. And she was
Okay.
so kind and patient. Like, she
Oh,
was the one for me,
yeah.
so
Yeah.
loving, so kind, so patient. and so accepting. And boy, sometimes you just need that
Oh,
person who has all this knowledge. They're so educated, but they also have
huge.
this beautiful caring, like that
Yeah.
place. I always say when you talk with someone, it's like a sacred space, you know,
Yeah.
and it's safe space.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
many people need that and they don't even know they need it. So I want to say, if all we talk about here is don't be afraid of it, and there's
Right.
no shame in it, and you can feel
Absolutely.
so much better, please just go. Give it a shot.
Absolutely. The VA has a saying that I like, it takes the strength of a warrior to ask for help. And I think that's so true. It takes
Oh
strength to
gosh.
say, I'm struggling. I can't do this on my own. There's some hope, just even a modicum, perhaps just a tiny, tiny blade of grass of hope that maybe someone can help me. They don't have a
I love
magic
that.
wand. We therapists don't have, a magic pill or a magic wand, but you don't have to walk through this by yourself. And yes, we
Right.
have research-based skills. We can help you with that experience of being seen, of being
Yes.
heard, of being empowered. Wow, that's huge. That is huge. So I
I
love that we're
just,
able to talk about this today. So, so important. And the letters after the name, sometimes, yeah, you need to have some training, right? But maybe some of these people have amazing credentials. They went to Harvard or all this stuff. It's like, that's not as important as do you really feel seen and heard? Are you dismissed in your 2-minute medication check or whatever it would be? Keep shopping, find someone. And I think it's often good to ask family or friends, or as you had
yes.
said, maybe your doctor. Who do you recommend? Or a school for
Yeah.
kids, who do you recommend? They know who's good.
That's so good. I love how humble you are because you have so much experience. You have letters
Oh,
after your name. You're a published author. You've done amazing things, but you've
well,
never lost that human to human, that humility, and
well,
that you honor that, because that's so much a part of healing, is that
yeah.
human to human contact. You just have a gift. You were born with
Oh,
it.
well, thank you for saying it. Makes me
Yeah.
feel really good. Thank you. I mean, I'm a human being first, flawed with my own life challenges and everything else. And so I try in all my work to lead with that. And I'm informed
Yeah.
by all this stuff, but we got to show up as human beings first in our own stories. That is what you offer opportunities for people to share and talk. And that's what people connect with, right? It's like they
Right.
don't want me to cite the 52 research papers or all this shit. That's not important. They want to know and hear from someone's heart.
But the best doctors in any discipline, that's what it's sort of like painters and doctors, and they have all this incredible, all these years of studying, but they
Yeah.
get to the point where they can, transform it into something very, um, human. And
Right.
so we
Right.
need that. We need people who are informed, people who are knowledgeable. I'm so interested that you mentioned the vets because I just
Yeah.
interviewed a vet,
Oh,
um, and he's going to be rowing across the Pacific. His name is Roy Emerson, and he's an let me get this right, Army, like the elite Army Rangers, right?
oh,
And he's going to be in this tiny boat. I went to a fundraiser to pick up some. His wife is a wonderful caterer who we love. And
oh,
I went to pick up some of her fried chicken, and it's amazing.
oh.
We all love it. We went to the firehouse for a fundraiser, and they had the boat outside the firehouse. It's so small, you would die. And they're going to be taking it out in the Pacific and rowing
Wow.
nonstop from Monterey, California to Hawaii to raise awareness to prevent veterans committing suicide. And it's such a
Wow.
beautiful thing that he's doing. And
Wow. It's
and
amazing.
we talked about what you mentioned, is it's especially hard perhaps for people who are soldiers, for people who are in charge, for people
Yeah.
who never lose control, to admit
Mm-hmm.
that they have a problem. And for this
Mm-hmm.
man who's, from an elite force and, had a
Yeah.
great career and
Yeah.
amazing, for him to say, you know, there's help and you don't have to feel ashamed. And for him also to do the fundraising, people like
That's
you,
amazing.
you're saving lives by doing this work. You really
Oh,
are. And I was
oh.
so happy to have that be an episode. Um,
Yeah, what an
I just,
inspirational man. Wow, how very cool. It just reminds me of something you and I were talking about a couple minutes ago. It was that whole idea of stigma, because there have been people's like, don't stigmatize. You shouldn't stigmatize, that sort of stuff. And they found that doesn't really work very well, actually, like the just say no approach. what does work is exactly what this gentleman is doing, is like sharing his own story so people can relate. It's not like, oh, I'm different because I'm a psychologist or because I'm a veteran or whatever else. It's like, no, we all have struggles.
Yeah.
And so him being a role model for people, and lifting that up, that's the way to decrease stigma. That's the way to do it, is people
Right.
openly talking about their stories. Like, oh, I can relate. Oh, wow. If he's struggling and asking for help, maybe I can too. So
And to bring
bravo.
awareness. Yeah, to bring awareness to it. People don't understand how bad it is, how many veterans commit suicide every day.
Mhm.
And I
Yeah.
just love that they're choosing something they're good at, which is, an intense athletic endeavor.
Yeah,
Yeah,
really.
I asked a billion questions because I had no idea how you do that. And he said, "Oh no, we rode 2 hours on, 2 hours off." So I was like, "Oh, that makes it so much easier." Ha ha ha. It's just really boring. I mean, rowing across an ocean. I don't know. But anyway, I think it's heroic, both of you, what you do.
Well, thank you. And it takes all of us, in our different little corners of the world and different things that we do. And
Yeah,
again, most people will never go to a therapist or things. So we really have invested huge amounts of money. We're never going to break even. This is not about making money.
right.
This is really all about trying to reach people who are so often feel invisible. And so if,
Yeah,
families can, like, at the library or online, I mean, the PDF is like, $10. This is not a lot of money to, like, buy
right.
an ebook or something. Find some comfort. I'm like, oh, I can really relate to that dad who talked about X, Y, and Z. I really relate to that teenager who shared their story of their anger at their mom for, darn it all, why aren't you like my other friends' moms? Why can't I have people over? Why won't you come to
Oh,
my soccer game? Or if you do come to my basketball game, why do you yell and get out of control at the refs? Or why don't you shower regularly? Or whatever. It's like, oh, it's okay to be mad. Yes, it is. You can read other kids' stories and their
oh,
experiences. So we
it's
hope
so,
it offers some sense of comfort. I'll tell you a neat story. I was connecting with some folks, actually in Iceland, some psychiatric nurses who are using our books in their psychiatric hospitals, which is pretty cool. And this
that is
nurse
cool.
just emailed me the other day and said they've been doing some programs for the teenagers whose parents have mental illness. And they've had no resources for them at all. And so this nurse gave this 11-year-old little girl, and she got the biggest smile on her face saying, for me, because she said
Oh,
there's nothing else out there. So, like, to me,
oh,
that makes this all worthwhile. It's like we're
it,
actually
it
reaching
does.
kids. And that's the opportunity to talk to amazing people like you. It's like we need help. We need help, Lynn, in spreading the word about letting
Right.
people know these resources exist.
And I'm so struck with that same old important message that we have to stay connected with each other and remember
Um,
that we need each other. You can't be in
Absolutely.
isolation. You can't be alone. You don't have to be. And
Absolutely.
you just need
Absolutely.
to always connect. And that's why part of why I do this podcast is the stories. I know that they're going to reach somebody
Yeah.
and they're going to hear how someone overcame something or they're going to get information. I don't, it's so funny. I was telling somebody, it's like I release the episodes out into the world. They're like little boats. I don't know where they go.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
and whoever gets what they get out of it, it's so wonderful because we're inspired when we connect and feel for other
Absolutely.
people. And we can learn from
Absolutely.
other people's examples, and especially the teenagers, that they don't feel alone. That really touches my heart.
Yeah, because that's the name of the book. I'm not alone. And I will
Yeah,
say, oftentimes the parents like to read the book first, which makes sense because it's
yeah,
even sometimes hard to know, what do I talk to my kids about? How do I
yeah.
open the conversation? So it can be a tool for the parents, as well as for the kids.
That's so good. Well, you're
Yeah.
doing the good work out there, and
Hey, Lynn, thank
we're
you
very
so
proud of
much.
you. Thank you for
Oh,
sharing
Lynn.
it. Is there anything we didn't talk about? Is there anything you want to add?
No, the only thing I would say is people can see free chapters and resources. There are a lot of free resources on our website. So if you're willing to put in your show notes our website, which is
Of
that
course.
www.seeds with an S,
Good.
seedsofhopebooks.com. Then
Yeah, I
people can
like
see
to
all sorts
say
of
it
free resources.
because some people don't read the show notes. I'll put it
Right.
all in the show notes. I put a lot because I'm a writer. My show notes
Ah!
are like extensive, but yeah, I like to say it
Yeah,
also
so
because some
seeds,
people don't
some
read
people,
them.
right.
Right.
The seedsofhopebooks.com. You can see, and then
Yeah.
they're available at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, wherever, Target. But that's where you can see sample chapters and things like that.
That's
So,
so good.
no, I just wish you well with this podcast and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and discuss. I just really felt like you and I connected, and that was a really good feeling
Oh,
about an
I love
important
it.
topic. So,
I'm so glad. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know you've helped people and you'll continue to help people. And that makes me feel really good to be a tiny part of that. Um,
absolutely, absolutely. We're all in this together, Lynn, right?
got that. You got that right. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.